So I'm going to sing a little prayer to set us in the right direction for this time together. Prayers in Buddhism are really mostly aspirations. May this, may that. And so because in Buddhist view, which we're going to talk about, every thought counts. Every thought kind of imprints something in the mind, creates a habit. So prayers are marvelous, So we're thinking the first two lines, it's for those of us in the room who already identify with being Buddhist. So we're just reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings and so on. The second two lines are this aspiration. We're going to listen to these words, these teachings, and that includes me, to hear it as advice. That's how it's given, it's advice. But like all advice that people give you, you're the boss, you don't have to take it, you can choose to take it. But it is advice. Advice for what? Well, two things, really. The first part is advice for how to put ourselves together, how to become this marvelous, marvelous person. To be less neurotic, less fearful, less depressed, less angry, less low self-esteem, more kind, more wise, more compassionate, more useful. Very simply, that's the essence of the advice of all of Buddhist teachings from A to Z. And then the essential purpose of all that is finally, because then we're qualified to help others. Bottom line. So for this reason, I think we're sitting here, listening to these teachings. And I'll sing it in Tibetan. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penjir sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penjir sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la Jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog. Okay. So saying the Buddha's advice is to help us get less neurotic, less depressed, less miserable, more kind, more wise sounds so simple it's almost embarrassing, doesn't it? It seems, wow, that sounds nice. What's the recipe, please? Well, another way of putting it, what all of Buddhism is from A to Z, all the extensive metaphysics, psychology, the philosophy, all the techniques of meditation, all of it, all this vast body of knowledge, which indeed it is, several thousand years old, coming from the amazing body of knowledge that preceded it, these incredible Hindus, these amazing Indians. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who really began the investigation into the nature of reality, the nature of self. Of course, we Anglo, white, whatever we are people, Europeans, we think probably Mr. Freud invented it, didn't we? A couple of hundred years ago, What do we know about India? Absolutely zero. But it was these amazing Indians, this extraordinary history, this body of knowledge, this literature that is vast, about which we know nothing in our culture. So in all of those teachings, one way of presenting all of Buddha's teachings, all of Buddha's views, metaphysics, psychology, philosophy, is it's a method, it's a series of techniques, it's a method for stopping suffering and getting happiness. Even more simple than what I just said before, This is literally the point. Another way of presenting the whole thing is in terms actually of the meaning of the word Buddha. That's Sanskrit. And the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye. This tells us everything. Sang implies the utter eradication from one's own mind, one's own very being, one's own consciousness, of all ego and all the voices of ego, all the fears and anxiety and the dramas that we are utterly familiar with and which we, in our world, our modern psychology, utterly believe are at the core of our being. There's an absolute given for all of us. This is who we are, But it's very shocking. So it's shocking to hear what Buddha's saying. That no, we can get rid of this stuff. Sang implies the utter eradication from one's mind of all this nonsense. But not only that, he says, you can become a Sangye. Gye, the development to perfection of all the other stuff. Clarity, kindness, wisdom, generosity, well-being, joy, all these things that we know are also in us and that we know are the nice things. This is really using simple language. But don't underestimate it, you know. So that's Sangye. And the Buddha is saying, hey guys, this is what I've achieved, and this is my methodology. Over to you. If you'd like to achieve the same for yourself, follow those steps. That's it. And that's what being a Buddhist means. A person who chooses to take these views on board, you know. So then if the goal is to rid the mind of all the rubbish, why? Because the Buddha's view is that causes the suffering, and we can get rid of the suffering and its causes, therefore the delusions, and to develop perfection or the goodness. Why? Because that's the source of happiness. It's another way of presenting the entirety of Buddha's view, you know. So it seems very logical then, if you want happiness, or even indeed if you want to go one step further and say, yes, I would like to be more loving, I'd like to be more compassionate, I'd like to be more wise, more brave, more courageous, more joyful, oh yes, then here's Buddha's methodology. So what part of us becomes a Sangye? Well, in order to understand this, each of us can now have our own view in this room. Everybody would have a different view of what is happiness, what is suffering, and indeed, what are the causes. Everybody would have a very different view. But as it's Buddha who's saying this, this is Buddha's deal, we better know what he means by where does suffering exist and where do the causes of suffering exist if we want to get rid of them, and equally the happiness and the causes of happiness. So it's kind of logical. We've got to hear it logically. But often what happens is when we speak in spiritual terms, like we're doing here, and we know we're not discussing gardening or mathematics, so we have our kind of spiritual hats on, not our practical hats. Well, that's wrong. Keep your practical hat on, please. Because it's the same precision and clarity and depth of analysis and logic that we know we need to use to even make a cake, to grow a garden, you know, to do anything, is exactly what Buddha demands we use to do this job of becoming a Sangye, of producing our own Sangye, of doing the job of lessening suffering and growing happiness. So we need to understand the words. First step, you know. You don't make a cake and Mummy says put a teaspoon of sugar. Well, you can't identify as teaspoon, you will never get you won't get the right cake. You've got to be on the same page, what a teaspoon is. It's exactly the same here. And it quite surprises us because we don't think in those terms when we come to spiritual. So then which part of us does this potential for happiness and freedom from suffering exist? And therefore, which part of us does the job of freeing ourselves from suffering and growing happiness? Well, it's called our mind. It's called our mind. So that's a word we all know. And because we're modern, we're philosophical materialists, most of us, we know we are referring to the brain because we only posit physical things. Now with these amazing conversations, especially with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all that mob, conversations with scientists and modern people, the last 30, 40 years, only now as they're coming together, this marvelous discussions, you know, bringing together these views, these seemingly utterly different views from different worlds, showing the common ground, which is amazing. And that's the skill of His Holiness. It's his initiative, and he's incredible what he's achieved, you know. So now, meeting and definitely the philosophical materialist views, the scientific people have really been moved and touched and affected by their experiences with the Dalai Lama and learning a little bit about this amazing Indian body of knowledge, you know. Buddha's view of the universe, Buddha's view of being, Buddha's view of consciousness. But always remind ourselves of one point, which I continue to repeat this, it's so important. Where does this information come from? Well, putting it in a perfect way, from our modern philosophical scientific perspective, this is the only time I've ever been asked this question on this planet. I notice we all ask the same questions, but this one I've only heard once. A scientist in New Zealand, 10 years ago, in Nelson, and he said, who revealed these teachings to the Buddha? Which is a perfect question if you are a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or any of the you know, creator religions. If that's your viewpoint, Because that's, and the thing is, but that's our view of religion. We conflate religion with believing in a creator. That's not the way Buddhists think about it at all. You ask a Buddhist, are you religious? Oh, yeah. Oh, you believe in a creator? Oh, no. We conflate those words. It's not the Buddhist view. So the usual view we have in our world, and the only ones we tend to understand, are the ones that assert a creator. So this question he asked is perfect. Because teachings, by definition, religious teachings, by definition, are coming from a creator, a being on high, who is the boss, who is the creator, who then because they're the boss, punishes and rewards, and that's their job because they made the place and made me and made the laws. That's perfectly reasonable. And when I told him, well, nobody, I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed E equals mc squared to him? Of course he was laughed and everybody was shocked. But that's the approach in Buddhism. And even though we hear these words, which are very simple, it takes us a while to hear this. Because our assumptions of what is religion are quite deep. And initially we don't accept it. Nah, come on. But Buddha, in that sense, everything that's called Buddhism, that's valid, and I tell you there's a load of rubbish published on this planet, especially in the modern world. We don't think it matters. Because we think it's religion, we don't think it has to be tested. I mean, people do more rigorous testing just to publish a cookbook than they do to publish a nice book about meditation because they had a vision in their meditation last week and now they write their own book. Really, that's our attitude towards religion, which is incredibly insulting. So the Buddha is not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. In fact, you could say quite simply, as far as his view is concerned, we don't need creating. And because he's got a very different take on everything. He's not criticizing people. He just says it's just not his view. Meaning, not his observation. So Buddha, like Einstein, he's saying, here's my methodology. And where's it come from? My experience. And what's that mean? He, with his own experience, his own mind, has observed the universe. He hasn't made up something in his head. He's observed the universe. He's observed beings, minds. And he says, this is what I found to be so. This is what I've achieved as a result of it. This is what is true. That's what a scientist says. Einstein doesn't go, well, I think E equals mc squared. It could be F. But as you know, maybe this, it's all the same anyway. No, he wouldn't talk like that. But he wouldn't ask you to believe him. He wouldn't say he had a vision of it. He would not tell you it was revealed to him. That's how we think about religion. But Buddha would not talk in the same way. This is what I found to be so. Where have you got it from, Buddha? My own hard work, my mind, my own observation of reality. So he's saying, this is reality. Don't have to believe me. And by applying all this, this is where it leads you to. Your achievement of your own sangye. The achievement of the ridding of your own mind of all the nonsense, and therefore your suffering, and the development to perfection in your own mind of all the goodness, therefore your happiness. And now your capability to be of benefit to others. But it's the exact same attitude. So to understand that, we have to know what he means by the mind. And that's where the radical difference is. We have to know these things. We can't just say, oh, I like Buddhism, oh yeah, I believe in karma. I mean, again, you don't say, oh, I don't believe in math. Oh, you believe in mathematics? Yes. I'm happy for you. It works. Other people use it. It's very good. But what if your mother says, go buy 5 oranges? If you can't count, if you can't use mathematics, merely believing in mathematics is useless to you. It doesn't help. And we want to really get that difference between knowing something and believing it. So, okay, so let's look at what Buddha says the mind is, because that's where all the work has to be done. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. First of all, the word mind is used synonymously, broadly speaking, with the word consciousness. They don't have a different flavour. Often in the West, we think consciousness has more of a sense of a depth or something. No, it's just another word. It's another word for mind. First. Second, it's referring to a much vaster spectrum of experiences than the way we use the word in the modern world. Third point, I'll go back these two together. It does not, the word does not refer to the brain. So if you're a neuroscientist, don't be shocked or think this is a load of nonsense. There are ways to put these two things together, which is what these amazing scientists and the Dalai Lama and his mob are all doing. You know, much of it published now, I think. Buddha does not argue we've got a brain. How can he? But you ask these amazing meditators, before the Buddha, the Indians, before the Buddha came along, these amazing geniuses thousands of years before him, who are the ones who came up with the much of the stuff that is now in the Buddha's worldview still, but he's got his own take on it. They're the ones who created this extraordinarily skillful psychological technique called single-pointed concentration, which the world vaguely knows as mindfulness meditation, you know. It's a technique that these genius thinkers, spiritual practitioners, philosophers came up with well before the Buddha. And what it is this extraordinary, skillful, disciplined technique that enables you to completely subdue the grosser level of consciousness, which is when the brain is functioning and the senses are functioning and our conceptuality is functioning, which is all we posit as the mind in our culture. But utterly to subdue that, to cease it, but not to become unconscious. Unconscious at the gross level, yes, but then you can learn, you can see with this rigorous discipline clarity that you've cultivated in this meditation technique, you've learned to access a subtler level of your own cognitive process, your own consciousness. It's a subtler level of consciousness, which is not visible to the eyes, which you cannot see under a microscope, and which does not depend upon a brain, or a body for that matter. This is part of the knowledge in the East for thousands of years, but we arrogant modern scientists have so much hubris, thinking we're the smarty pants of the universe, and all these idiots for thousands of years before us haven't seen the truth, and we finally found the truth. I mean, it's kind of rude, you know, to begin to read some of the vast literature, which is what's happening more and more now. I mean, Wisdom has got a whole series, Wisdom Publications, a whole series of books now. This is all, you know, really spearheaded by Thupten Jinpa, Geshe Thupten Jinpa, who's a layman now, lives in Canada. Amazing literature, translating more and more of this incredible literature from this extraordinary body of knowledge, well before the Buddha even, plus all the Buddhist knowledge that came since, which is, as I said, unknown to us in the modern world. It's extraordinary. So we've got these subtler levels of mind, in other words. And eventually, when you've accomplished this, what they call in English, calm abiding, single-pointed concentration. In Lama Yeshe's recent book that I edited, this very beautiful book, I should have reminded you to get copies. We should have had it this time, had copies available. Mahamudra, yeah. It's a very beautiful book, very special. I might read a bit. Okay, but you can get it to everybody to buy their own. I'll read you a bit from it this weekend. It's very moving. In there, you know, Lama was very radical in the way that he would try and get us excited to practice, you know. So he's got a chapter, the amazing benefits, the unbelievable, the incredible benefits of single-pointed concentration. He talks about some of the qualities that you would cultivate, having accessed this level of your own mind, you know, and the power our mind has. None of this is in our modern view. None of it. It's like weird, mystical stuff, you know, extraordinary capacity our mind has got. So the point I'm getting at here is mind, one, it refers to your cognitive process itself. Gross consciousness, subtle, this is a tantric model. There's subtle consciousness, which the only time we ever access that vividly is when we dream or when we're in a coma, but we don't have any control over it, but that's subtle consciousness, which does not depend upon a brain. And then even what they call, in this model, very subtle consciousness. We have this spectrum from gross to subtle to very subtle, of the capacity of cognition, our capacity for cognition. That's our consciousness. That's our mind. So it's much subtler. Buddha asserts much subtler levels, which then makes it even theoretically easier for us to comprehend then why the Buddha, you know, why then the Buddha would talk about how mind doesn't begin, the next quality is it doesn't begin in your mother's womb. If you're a Christian, you agree at least on one thing with the philosophical materialists. You began in your mummy's womb. In the one case, God made you. In the other case, mummy and daddy made you. We at least agree on that you both got a creator. Buddha disagrees with both. We don't need creating, babe, Buddha says. So Buddha, where do I come from? Not mummy and daddy. We don't track ourselves back to another source. That's weird for the Buddha. We track our own consciousness back to itself. It's a river, think of it like a river of mental moments, starting now that goes back, unbroken chain of mental moments. If you keep going back inexorably, you'll get back to the first second of conception. Well, where do you go back to the second before conception? Well, the egg goes back to mummy's body and sperm goes back to daddy's body, and before that there was God, so never mind that one. Your consciousness goes back to a previous, obviously the subtler level. A few weeks before that, it was in another body, and so on and so forth. And from the Buddhist perspective, as mad as it sounds, but just stating it here, and it'll come up again and again, because the only logical deduction for the Buddha is it's a beginningless continuity of mental moments. It's the product of cause and effect. And also it's endless. So the Buddha's view is, in that sense, we don't need creating, we're already existing. And the law that governs this consciousness, the law that governs what this consciousness feels, what I feel, the quality of my life, my happiness, my suffering, there's a natural law that Buddha says he has observed, and that's called the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. So these are the nuts and bolts, understanding the way the mind works, and understanding this law of karma that runs the universe, or the universe runs within. No one made it up, because there's no creator. He's observed it, like a good botanist has observed the laws of botany, like Einstein has observed the laws of whatever. This is the nuts and bolts of the Buddhist daily practice, Buddhist view, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology. And therefore the stuff that one uses to apply in one's daily life to do the job of becoming one's own Buddha. So your mind is not physical. Doesn't mean you haven't got a brain. Doesn't mean there's not an intimate relationship. Of course there is. The mind does not come from mummy and daddy. Your mind does not come from a creator. Your mind doesn't come from nowhere. And it's got much subtler levels. And finally, as we've said, it's got this amazing, outrageous, over-the-top potential to be utterly rid of all the rubbish and totally developed in all the goodness. That's the essence of Buddha's view, and that's what the mind is. So that's what we have to discuss. So what do you do with this information if you haven't, let's say you've heard it for the first time, or the 21st time? Why it would be difficult for us to even hear it is only because we have another bunch of views in our mind that contradict it. And usually those views, we've been brought up with them, and we don't question them. I don't think any materialist, anybody, would ever question, are you sure my mother and father made me? We would never question. We take it as a given, you know. So yes, Buddha says they very kindly did give you a body. There's no problem there. He's not arguing with that. That's why we've got to have this understanding that mind and body are not equivalent. In order to understand Buddhism, we've got to understand that. You don't have to agree with Buddha. You take it as your hypothesis. It's very simple. And you might discover that Buddha's wrong, in which case, thank you, Buddha, bye-bye. No problem. Mummy and Daddy did give you a body, no problems. But they did not give us love, hate, jealousy, compassion, psychosis, being good at music or football. And God didn't give you either. Nobody else did. In fact, the more I can say is the more, being a so-called Western person, immersing myself in this stuff, taking these views as my working hypothesis, the more weird it seems that you can get anger from someone else, that you can get musicianship from someone else, that you can get psychosis from someone else. It just doesn't fit with the Buddhist view. And this is really a central thing to get clear about, that's got a really powerful implication in day-to-day practice. That my mind, what's in it, my tendencies, my characteristics, they are mine. This is a massive starting point to really understand the basics of Buddhist practice. And it takes time. Only, not because the words are difficult. They're not difficult words. These are easy words. But only because the views they represent are absolutely opposite to the views entrenched in our mind now, that we take as default mode. That's why it's difficult hearing, because we have a whole series of other assumptions, which very much means that what the Buddha is demanding us to do is really look into our assumptions and don't assume that what I think is true. Don't assume what I feel is how it really is. Now, we'd say that's what scientists do. Well done, Buddha says, because that's what he says I have done. That's the job you should do. Dealing with your own reality, with who you are, and indeed with the reality of the universe in front of us. This is the approach in Buddhism.